and Meghan began the summer with a carefully timed release of photographs that appeared on the surface to show a family at ease. Days before they stepped into a formal gala in California, a gallery of images landed on Instagram. The pictures presented a private holiday, sunlight on faces, relaxed postures, the appearance of contentment. Yet the sequence of events matters more than the images themselves. The photographs came first. The public test of the marriage came after. In the world of mature observation, one does not ignore order. A private family summer in private locations does not ordinarily produce frames taken at precisely the correct distance with the correct lens at the correct moment. Candid life does not arrange itself for the camera. These frames were taken by someone invited to take them, framed by a woman who has spent years mastering the art of presentation, and released on a schedule chosen by those who manage public perception. That is not a holiday album, it is a campaign document. When commentators later examined those same photographs, one word returned again and again: performative. Harry and Meghan appear in the frames looking content, even affectionate. Yet a performance requires an audience, a script, and a reason to persuade. Contentment needs none of these. Contentment has no release date and no publicist. An older observer recognizes the difference between a life lived and a life displayed. The volume of material produced by the couple has increased in exact proportion to the distance they have placed between themselves and the institution that once defined them. Documentaries, a memoir, a podcast, a lifestyle brand, a cookery appearance, an Instagram account fed daily. The more product appears, the clearer the signal becomes. A couple whose private life is secure does not feel the need to file regular evidence of its existence. The first question that appears in search bars is straightforward. Why are Harry and Meghan so often photographed apart? The answer lies not in statements or captions, but in attendance. Inseparable people are seen together. That is the simplest test available. The record shows months of solo movements. Harry driving 2.5 hours each way from Montecito to Los Angeles for a dinner at Nobu without his wife. 5 hours in a car is not a scheduling accident. It is a decision made in advance by a man who preferred to be somewhere his wife was not. The list continues. Harry alone at a Time magazine athletics event in California, alone in New York, alone in China, alone in Ukraine, alone previously in Britain, alone at a polo match, barefoot, watching other people's children play. 4 continents of solitary appearances from a couple. No one booked Prince Harry for Prince Harry alone. No one booked Meghan Markle for Meghan Markle alone. The asset was the combination, the royal and the actress, the fairy tale, the two of them entering a room together. Split the pair, and the asset does not merely weaken, it changes character entirely. A solo appearance is therefore not a diary quirk. It is the product being offered without the element that once made it valuable. The polo image remains the quietest and most revealing. A man standing alone, barefoot, watching someone else's children. It was described by a critic who held no affection for him. The Sussex response to such a record has always been the same. More content, more photographs of the very thing the photographs continue to fail to prove. A guest appearance on MasterChef Australia provided another illustration. Meghan spoke of a childhood centered on fresh produce, good vegetables, quality meats, and food sourced locally. The story was warm, wholesome, and perfectly suited to a food-related booking in Australia. Yet the same woman has previously described the same childhood on her own program in markedly different terms. 2 versions of the same decade, told to 2 different audiences for 2 different commercial purposes. An older listener recognizes the pattern. Whichever version serves the present booking is the version that is told. The past becomes inventory. It can be restocked to suit the buyer. Once a childhood can be rewritten for a television appearance, there is little reason to treat later descriptions of a marriage as fixed truth. One observer summarized the Sussex approach with unusual clarity. Whatever message they send out, the reality is often the opposite. If they declare happiness, the evidence points elsewhere. If they declare difficulty, the presentation softens. They live inside a closed loop in which their own statements mark their own homework. Meghan's truth and observable reality have frequently stood at odds. The photographs, the captions, the cameos, the carefully worded statements form a circle that rarely admits outside measurement. The next event broke that circle. It placed the couple in a room with people who were not on any payroll and who had no obligation to sustain the image. Harry and Meghan attended the 40th anniversary of the David Foster Foundation. This was one of the few remaining rooms in which they were still described in print as long-standing friends of the host, not clients, not sponsored guests, but friends. The word carries weight. It is the reason the events that followed carry weight. Commentators noted that the couple appeared to have little else filling their diary. The working royal calendar had ended. The global charitable platform had narrowed. The foundation that once carried their name had passed into other hands. The streaming contract that once made them among the highest-paid non-acting television signings had concluded. What remained was a friend's anniversary party, and that party had become a fixture. At the photo call, Meghan extended her hand toward David Foster, not toward a journalist, not toward a critic, not toward a member of the royal family who had carefully avoided her company, toward the host of the evening, the man whose anniversary she had come to mark, the friend whose invitation had brought her into the room. The hand remained extended. Nothing came back. A snub from an enemy can be turned into content. A snub from a stranger means little. A snub from a friend at his own celebration with cameras present is information. He was the one person in that room with every reason to complete the picture. The footage shows the gesture and the absence of response. That single second outranks many of the rumors that circulate around this couple. Harry and Meghan stepped into the photo call at the David Foster Foundation gala under the gaze of professional cameras, yet the behavior that followed was not new to those who had watched the couple over successive years. Meghan moved among the guests with the familiar air of someone arranging a scene rather than simply occupying one. She directed adults on where to stand, how to turn, and how the frame should be composed. The gestures were precise, practiced, and entirely consistent with earlier public moments in which she had taken charge of positioning. The most telling parallel lay with Dr. Sophie Chandauka. On a previous occasion, Meghan had similarly instructed Chandauka on placement for photographs. Chandauka was no ordinary guest. She had become the chairwoman of Sentebale, the charity Prince Harry founded in memory of his mother and which he no longer controlled. The last time that particular arrangement of bodies took place, the outcome reversed the intended picture. The charity passed fully under Chandauka's authority, and Harry found himself outside the structure he had once led. At the Foster Gala, the same method appeared again. Arrange the room, arrange the people inside it, then observe what the room does in response. This time the room answered immediately. One hand remained extended and received nothing in return. Control, once exercised, does not always produce the composition desired. It can instead reveal the limits of influence when the people being directed no longer feel obliged to comply. If the affectionate explanation of the marriage has been tested in public and returned a clear result, another reading becomes difficult to ignore. The marriage now functions less as a private partnership and more as a structure designed to hold certain valuable elements in place: titles, royal connections, pedigree, and the residual elevation that still attaches to the Sussex name. Every item on that list belongs to Prince Harry and was acquired before the couple left royal life in 2018. The titles came from a grandmother. The connections came from a father and a wider family network. The pedigree came from bloodline. The elevation came from a wedding that once commanded global attention. On this interpretation, the marriage is an arrangement organized around inherited property that only one party brought into the union. Commentators have begun to describe the effort as Project Diana, an attempt to keep the late princess's legacy attached to the Sussex brand even as other sources of status and income have narrowed. Meghan's interest in this view remains fixed on the residual power of those titles and connections. Harry's interest appears increasingly directed toward recovering some measure of the institutional standing he once held. When a marriage is examined primarily as a vehicle for assets rather than as a shared life, the pressure on its foundations becomes practical rather than sentimental. The assets do not renew themselves. They require constant maintenance, and the cost of that maintenance has grown visible. The summer photographs did not appear in isolation. They were released into the same narrow window of weeks that contained a significant legal setback. Harry's long-running case against the Daily Mail had been lost. Those who follow the litigation most closely described any further appeal as a fool's errand. A costs order was expected on a timetable that took no interest in curated Instagram galleries or carefully timed family images. The reel of a blissful holiday was therefore published against a calendar already carrying a lost judgment and a financial obligation that could not be postponed or wished away. The pictures were not a simple celebration of private contentment. They were released into the shadow of that judgment. The reputation that might once have served as collateral for public standing has itself been described by one commentator as already damaged beyond retrieval. She stated without hesitation that she held no fear of being sued by him. That single observation carries its own weight. When a public figure's reputation is treated as already spent by those who would otherwise have reason to tread carefully, the balance of power in any remaining dispute disputes has shifted. The gallery and the judgment belong to the same season. One was meant to project strength, the other recorded a concrete loss. The contrast between the two remains the clearest measure of the gap between presentation and circumstance. When the separate elements are placed on a single ledger, the picture becomes stark. Titles that cannot easily be converted into reliable income. A foundation that once carried the Sussex name and is now run by someone else. A court costs bill that arrives on a fixed schedule. A lifestyle brand closely tied to one country and one particular quality of light. And beneath all of these, a marriage that continues to resist convincing photography, no matter how many professionals are engaged or how carefully the release is timed. The commercial value of the couple was always rooted in the pair. Once the pair appears more often apart than together, the underlying asset changes character. Solo appearances by Harry in New York, in China, in Ukraine, in California, and previously in Britain are not merely diary entries. They are instances of the product being offered without the element that once made it distinctive. The polo image, barefoot and alone among other people's children, remains the quietest and most revealing entry on the list. A man standing in that position has already made a series of choices about where he prefers to be and with whom. The balance sheet does not require dramatic language. It simply records what is present and what is absent. What is present is a collection of diminishing returns. What is absent is the easy, unforced evidence of a shared life that once formed the core of the public offering. The question of where the next 20 years will be lived has moved from private discussion into public observation. Harry continues to return to Britain without his wife. The pattern is consistent enough to require explanation. Only one of the two partners has unfinished institutional business on that side of the Atlantic. Reports have circulated that Harry wishes to raise the children in the United Kingdom. At the same time, Meghan has constructed an American lifestyle enterprise built around Californian light, local produce, and a particular vision of domestic ease that cannot simply be transplanted to Windsor without losing its essential character. The jam, the wine, the carefully lit interiors, the entire visual language of the brand are rooted in one specific place. Move that operation and it ceases to be the same product. The divergence is therefore not a disagreement about Christmas arrangements or the length of a summer visit. It is a disagreement about country, and beneath that, a disagreement about which of the two people the coming decades will primarily serve. When one partner looks toward restoration of a former role and the other remains committed to an enterprise that can exist only in its present location, the shared household begins to function as two separate calendars under one roof. The paths have already begun to separate. Reports continue to surface that a route back toward some form of working association with the royal family may still exist for Harry. The condition attached to that possibility is stated with unusual clarity by those who follow the matter most closely. The possibility could happen, but not with Meghan. 4 words summarize the structural problem. The path exists. The path carries a passenger limit. The person who does not fit through it is the person Harry brought with him when he left. Every carefully arranged conversation with King Charles, every olive branch, every step that improves Harry's standing inside the institution simultaneously reduces Meghan's relevance to the same process. There is no version of reconciliation that advances both parties equally. Progress for one is contraction for the other. The household therefore contains a permanent tension. What benefits the husband in the long term diminishes the wife's residual claim on the very assets that once made the marriage commercially powerful. The condition is not negotiable from Montecito. It is set by the institution Harry once left and now appears to wish to reapproach. The marriage sits directly across that fault line. 4 elements once held the arrangement upright: finances, purpose, the future of the children, and the question of country. Commentators who have followed the couple for years now describe all 4 as under visible strain. The financial picture has narrowed. The sense of shared purpose that once animated public statements has fractured into separate professional tracks. The question of where the children will be raised has moved from private discussion into competing briefings. The country in which the next phase of life will be lived is no longer a settled matter. When every load-bearing wall shows stress, the structure itself becomes the subject of observation rather than the life it was meant to shelter. The July journey to Britain supplied a practical illustration. Plans shifted in public view. Meghan was said to be coming, then not coming. The children were included, then excluded. Security decisions of that kind are made once and quietly by professionals. Diary conflicts are resolved in private conversation. What the public witnessed was a negotiation conducted through successive briefings while journalists listened. Married couples settle such matters in the kitchen. They do not allow the press to become a third party to the discussion of whether one spouse will board the aircraft. The British visit that was intended to function as a reset instead produced a fortnight of coverage dominated by uncertainty, accommodation arrangements, competing briefings, and the repeated revision of who would or would not travel became the central story. One experienced commentator described the couple as having become something of a show circus. The original purposes of the trip, conversations about funding, an appearance connected to Invictus, and an attempted improvement in relations with the wider family, were overshadowed by the spectacle of indecision. The reset did not repair reputation. It documented in real time the difficulty of maintaining a coherent public presentation when the private arrangements themselves remain unresolved. The back and forth with Buckingham Palace was read by some as petulance and by others as evidence of a household that could no longer coordinate its own movements without external commentary. A trip designed to demonstrate stability instead supplied continuous evidence of the opposite. The circus, once established, tends to continue for as long as the underlying disagreements remain unaddressed. In the weeks surrounding the California Gala and the release of the summer photographs, a familiar secondary narrative began to circulate with increasing speed. Stories of another relationship attached themselves to Prince Harry. Thumbnails appeared across various platforms. Speculation filled comment sections and secondary channels. The allegation was simple and commercially attractive, that the marriage had already been replaced, in practice if not in law, by an involvement elsewhere. Yet the same programs and commentators who have examined the Sussex marriage with the least sympathy and the greatest attention to documented behavior dismissed those particular claims with unusual firmness and consistency. Harry may be miserable within the present arrangement, they stated, but he is not involved with anyone else. The denial was delivered flatly, without hedging, and was repeated for emphasis. The source of that dismissal matters. These were not defenders of the couple. They were critics who have spent years cataloging the contradictions, the solo appearances, the financial pressures, and the public gestures that fail. They would have gained more immediate attention, more clicks, and more sustained discussion by entertaining the rumor of an affair. Their refusal to do so is therefore instructive. It suggests that the allegation does not survive contact with the available record. Consider what the record actually shows and what it does not. The attendance lists, the travel patterns, the carefully timed releases of affection, the unanswered hand at a friend's own celebration, the contradictory accounts of childhood and of domestic contentment, the growing divergence over country and over the children's future. All of these can be observed, timed, and compared. An affair cannot. It remains, at present, an unanchored claim. The case against the current state of the marriage does not require it. Everything that can be placed on camera or on a calendar is already sufficient to demonstrate. A man does not need another person in order to reach the end of a situation. Loyalty in the narrow romantic sense and profound dissatisfaction with the larger arrangement can exist at the same time. The second condition does not depend on the first being broken. Misery inside a marriage and fidelity to its formal boundaries are not mutually exclusive. Many long marriages have contained both. The public discussion, however, often prefers the simpler and more dramatic story. An affair supplies a clear villain, a clear betrayal, and a clear narrative arc. The slower, quieter reality of two people who no longer share a destination is less convenient for headlines and less immediately sat. The commentators who rejected the rumor understood this distinction. They had already assembled a substantial body of observable evidence. Adding an unproven personal entanglement would have weakened rather than strengthened the overall account. It would have shifted attention from what can be verified to what cannot. In doing so, it would have given the couple an easy point of rebuttal. By declining the rumor, they kept the focus where it belongs, on the pattern of separate lives, the failed public gestures, the financial and institutional pressures, and the growing impossibility of presenting a unified future. The affair story remains the weakest element in the entire public conversation precisely because it cannot be demonstrated, while the rest of the evidence continues to accumulate in plain sight. Those who have followed the couple for years recognize that the more serious indictment does not require a third party. It requires only the willingness to notice who appears where, who travels alone, whose hand is left unanswered, and which version of the past is told to which audience on any given day. The rumors that do not hold are useful, mainly as a reminder of what the stronger evidence already shows without them. Return for a moment to the MasterChef Australia appearance, because the staging of that segment rewards slower examination than it usually receives. In the middle of a conversation devoted to food, memory, and the textures of domestic life, Prince Harry appears appeared on an iPad. The timing was precise. A lifestyle broadcast required visible evidence that a marriage still existed, and the evidence arrived in digital form from another hemisphere. He was not standing beside Meghan at the David Foster Foundation gala. He was not present in the photo call when her hand was extended toward the host and left unanswered. He materialized on a screen, on cue, as a message. The direction of the traffic is worth noticing. He is introduced into her broadcast, on her booking, to serve the narrative needs of her segment. The husband becomes an asset deployed at the moment reinforcement is required. This is not the ordinary behavior of a shared domestic life. In an ordinary marriage, the presence of one partner at an event does not need to be simulated by technology when the other partner is already in the room. The iPad appearance belongs to a different logic, the logic of managed presentation. Proof is supplied when proof is needed, and the form of the proof is adjusted to the medium at hand. A curated gallery of summer photographs released days before a California gala and a digital husband appearing mid-segment on an Australian cookery program are products of the same method. Both transmit a signal. Neither alters the underlying attendance record or the outcome of the gesture that went unanswered. Consider the implications for anyone watching with adult attention. When a marriage must be evidenced by a screen rather than by a shared physical presence, the evidence itself becomes part of the performance. The audience is invited to accept the image as a substitute for the reality it claims to represent. The same invitation was extended by the summer gallery. Look at these photographs, the release suggested. See how content we are. Then walk into a room where the contentment is tested in real time and watch the test return a different result. The iPad moment is efficient. It requires no travel, no shared diary, no risk of an unscripted public interaction. It delivers the required visual of connection without the complications that actual connection can produce. In that sense, it is a perfect expression of the present arrangement. The marriage continues to be available for deployment when the brand requires it. It is less reliably available as a lived, day-to-day partnership that places both people in the same place at the same time without the need for technological mediation. Older observers of public life have seen this pattern before. When the symbol of a relationship begins to matter more than the relationship itself, the symbol is refined and the relationship is allowed to thin. The iPad husband is a refined symbol. He appears when needed, delivers the necessary impression, and vanishes when the segment ends. The man himself continues to drive 2.5 hours for dinners that do not include his wife, continues to appear alone across multiple continents, and continues to explore paths that, according to those who follow the matter, may not accommodate the person whose broadcast he briefly entered. The screen, in the end, does not lie about its own nature. It shows what it is instructed to show. The instruction in this case was clear. Demonstrate that the marriage exists. The demonstration was delivered. The larger record of the summer continued to accumulate around it, unaltered. Are Harry and Meghan still together? On paper, the answer remains yes. The legal union continues. The shared surname continues. The public references to husband and wife continue. In the same room, on the same night, at the same photo call, standing beside each other when the moment required a joint presence, the lived record of this summer says something different. A signal can be transmitted for viewers while the man himself drives hours in the opposite direction for a dinner that excludes his wife. A wife can extend a hand at a friend's own celebration in front of the host's own cameras and watch it remain untouched. Solo appearances can accumulate across New York, China, Ukraine, California, and Britain, while the commercial value of the couple continues to rest on the fiction of inseparability. Contradictory versions of a shared childhood can be offered to different audiences without any apparent sense that consistency might matter. One observer stated the foundation of the arrangement with unusual directness. The marriage was not built on trust. It was built on a wish and a dream of a fairy tale romance that contained no solid truth from the beginning. Deception, in that reading, was present from the start. The claim is severe. It is also consistent with the pattern that has unfolded since. When the past can be rewritten to suit the needs of a television booking, when affection can be scheduled for release, when presence can be simulated by an iPad, the relationship between statement and reality becomes flexible. Paper continues to record a legal fact. The attendance lists, the travel patterns, the public gestures that fail, and the private distances that accumulate record a different set of facts. The gap between the two has become the central feature of the story. Paper is patient. It does not require daily evidence. The lived record is less forgiving. It notices who is present and who is absent. It notices whose hand is taken and whose is not. It notices when a gallery of contentment is released into the same week leaks that contain a lost court case and an approaching costs bill. It notices when the only reliable joint appearances are those that have been arranged, framed, and timed for public consumption. For mature audiences, the distinction between paper and lived reality is not a new one. Many institutions, many contracts, and many marriages have continued on paper long after the underlying relationship has changed character. The Sussex case is distinctive only in the volume of presentation that continues to insist on the older version of the story, while the newer version writes itself in the form of separate diaries, separate ambitions, and separate answers to the question of where the next 20 years will be lived. The paper marriage remains intact. The lived record has already begun to describe something else. The tension between the two is no longer subtle. It is the element that every careful examination of the summer eventually encounters. No photograph, however carefully staged, however well lit, however precisely timed for release, can manufacture the single quality it was published to prove. That is the summer reduced to its essential sentence. A gallery was released to demonstrate a marriage. A gala tested the demonstration in real time. A hand was extended at a friend's own celebration in front of the host's own cameras, in a room where the couple were still described as long-standing friends. Everyone present saw the gesture. No one completed it. The final measure is not found in commentary or in speculation. It is found in the contrast between what was prepared for public view and what occurred when the preparation met an unscripted moment. The photographs were meant to settle the question of contentment. The gala reopened it. The unanswered hand did not create the difficulty. It simply made the difficulty visible in a single, unambiguous. The last useful question that remains is not theoretical and does not require the invention of additional drama. What is the most recent year in which Harry and Meghan appeared genuinely at ease in the same unposed, uncaptioned, unreleased photograph? The answers offered by those who have followed the record with attention tend to lie further back than the current public presentation would prefer. The gap between the last unforced image and the present sequence of managed releases is itself part of the evidence. The financial pressures remain. The court costs remain. The shortfall and the deadlines that cannot be moved remain. The question of country remains unsettled. The condition attached to any possible return to institutional life remains in place. The public presentation continues because presentation is the one activity that can still be controlled with relative precision. The private reality, measured by who appears where, who travels alone, whose hand is left unanswered, and which version of the past is told to which audience, continues to write its own quieter and more consistent account. In the end, the summer did not supply a verdict so much as a series of measurements. The gallery measured the desire to project strength. The gala measured the limits of that projection. The hand measured the distance that had opened between intention and response. The iPad appearance measured the willingness to substitute a screen for a presence. The solo journeys measured the preference for separate space. Taken together, the measurements form a record that does not require exaggeration or invention. It requires only the willingness to notice what is already visible and to distinguish between what is performed and what is. That distinction, once made, is difficult to unmake. The photographs will continue to appear when they are needed. The statements will continue to be issued. The brand will continue to require evidence of its own coherence. Yet the summer has already supplied its own quieter ledger, written not in captions but in attendance, in gesture, and in the silence that followed an extended hand. The final measure of the season is the gap between the two ledgers and the growing difficulty of pretending that the gap is not there.